Mixed Media Music.
All right, welcome back to Mixed Media. If you are watching in post-production, we've already heard today from Nathan arguing with Reddit about video games and Irving reviewing the film No Tomorrow Part 1.
Yes, No Tomorrow.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to shift gears here, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the role of music in Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo. I'm going to try and keep this as short as I can, but it's a really fascinating score because, well, for two reasons. Number one, when I watched this film a couple weeks ago, about almost exactly 2 weeks ago, I didn't know anything about the film. I had played the music from the kind of climactic scene at a recent concert. So that was my only knowledge of the film at all. And, when I watch a film, you watch it. If you don't know what happens in it, that's good, I think. You don't want to know what happens the first time you watch it. It has kind of a big twist in it, we'll say. And, the minute I finished watching it, I'm like, wow, not only do I understand, some of what was going on that I didn't understand initially, which you're not supposed to, but I also felt like immediately I understand exactly what the role of the music was. And it's not obvious when you watch it until the end. There's actually been a little bit stuff, even in the popular world, written about the score. Alex Ross, the music critic from the New York Times, or the New Yorker, he wrote a really nice article about it that I was just reading, and he actually talks about a lot of the same things that I'm going to say, although he focuses on slightly different things that I'm focused on some other things. But overall, he says some really interesting stuff. So this is, again, a score that people have talked about quite a bit, even outside of the film music world. And what's interesting to me too is that not only is its purpose really readily discernible once you've seen the film, but it's kind of music that, to me, maybe just my personal taste in music, but it doesn't really work outside of the film. Yes, I just played it at a concert recently, the music from the big climactic scene. Yes, I guess it does exist in the concert world, but to me, I would not listen to this. I would not put it on unless I wanted to study it for some reason. And that's unusual for scores that I think are really great, because normally the scores I think are great work really well with the film and also work independently from the film. But this is a score that does something, I think, very different than what most films do. And, I was just talking with my family the other night. My mom, we were talking about a score from a John Barry film, I think Mary Queen of Scots or something like that. And my mom, was talking about, she pulled up this song from it that she thought was really impactful in her childhood. And she was reading some of the YouTube comments, and someone said, this is, a sign of a great score is that it makes you feel more sympathy for the character. And I said, I don't think that's true. And Vertigo is a great example of that. So we've talked in the past about a lot of composers describing their music as kind of forms of emotional manipulation. And I don't think that's what this is. So just as I'm going to kind of go through what I think the role is here, but just keep in mind, if you have not seen the film, spoiler warning, I would recommend you turn this off right now and go watch the film before you listen to this. Okay.
In fact, I'm going to put a very hideous spoiler warning tag, right? Just in case someone pops in, and has no idea what's going on, poor soul.
Yeah. This is a film. It's a masterpiece of filmmaking. At least I think it is. Not that I'm not the most educated film critic at all, but you don't want to. If you don't know what happens, you don't really want to know. And I'm gonna have to talk a little bit about that. Okay.
Yeah.
So instead of being emotional manipulation, I think what this score does. This is by the way, Bernard Herrmann is our composer, kind of the composer for most of Hitchcock's films until they're falling out later in life. To me, it does two things. I think complements some of the film techniques itself, like the camera techniques, in a musical way. And two, it's not about like what the characters, maybe it's roughly about what the characters are feeling, but it's not making us care about the characters or their feelings. It's kind of, the music is there to give us the theme, to reinforce the theme of what's going on, and in ways that aren't apparent until you know what happens. Okay, so how does it like actually mimic some of the really interesting camera stuff that's going on? And again, disclaimer, I'm not a film person, so there are probably way more interesting camera things that this is kind of a layman's understanding. But the big thing in Vertigo, as I understand it, is the vertigo effect, which I'm sure Irving could probably tell you more about. But my understanding is to create this sense of like one of the main characters at large, like somewhere up high and looks down and like feels dizzy and disoriented. The effect is the camera zooms in while being pulled out. Okay.
Yep. That's accurate.
Yeah, and so there's a musical analog of that. When the film starts, we get the prelude to it, and if you listen to the prelude, we start with we have high strings and low strings. Low strings go up at the same time the high strings go down. Then they meet, low strings go down, high strings go up, and it's a repeating pattern. So again, kind of just like disorienting, up and down, reversing itself. Really brilliant start to it, and it just continues. And then you get all these clustered chords that don't really progress anywhere harmonically. So we get that kind of musical analog, and that actually doesn't occur in the film, other than in the prelude. But it sets up our like disorienting, like, wow, I've lost my balance. I'm looking down at like this great height kind of thing. When we actually get those moments into the film, though, what we get is, lots of background stuff, but the primary thing that gives us this disoriented feeling is two harps rapidly going up and down scales. And suddenly the harps are like, I'm not even sure the harps anywhere else in the score, but they're like brought to the forefront of the mix. And it's just kind of dizzying array of notes. So we get two different kind of musical analogs to this vertigo effect shot. Okay. So again, that's not something that you find often in film, where like the music is trying to do something that the camera is doing, going for that kind of effect. The other thing, like I said, that this music is doing is that it's really going after the theme. Very, very briefly, so I don't want to stay here all night, but the music in general, it doesn't go anywhere, and it doesn't have much contour. So, for instance, most commentators when they're talking about this, they focus on like this 16-minute long segment where there's almost no dialogue, and our main character Scotty is trailing Madeline, one of the lead female characters, we'll say. And, she's driving around San Francisco, following her. She walks in somewhere, he walks in. There may be a few lines of dialogue here that let us know where he is. This just continues for 16 minutes. And essentially, it's a silent film, other than a few orienting lines of dialogue with lots of music. Again, the music doesn't go anywhere, though. So we start getting these, like, hints of things that Alex Ross calls, like, suggestions of melody, but they never develop into a melody. So we start getting these fragments. Other than that, it's just kind of a persistent rhythmic figure, and these chords that are very much drawn from Wagner's opera Tristan und Isolde, which we'll talk about in a second why that is. I'm going to borrow Alex Ross's language here. He says that it's simultaneously not tonal. It's not in any like identifiable key, but it's not dissonant really. It's kind of wandering. It kind of goes somewhere and it kind of fades back in. But there's not really there's no defined melodic shape. Okay. And some people suggest that the whole film, it definitely has a dreamlike quality to it, and lots of reasons, lots of light things going on that suggest that. And the music is certainly doing that as well. It's just not progressing anywhere. It's kind of there. Again, back on the idea of contour. What I mean by that is like there's no like melodic. We've talked about like music being a gestural language. There just basically are no gestures. It's just kind of chord, right? It's just kind of meandering, and we get these like slight suggestions of something which could develop into a romantic-ish melody, but then it doesn't ever like. There's like 2 or 3 notes, and then that's it. Okay. So these kind of thematic ideas. The other thing about them is as the film goes on and we, get more into the relationship between Scotty and Madeline, their kind of romantic interest in each other grows, and the stakes kind of get heightened. These ideas eventually do start becoming more apparent, but they never get fleshed out. So what they are essentially, they kind of occur in long chains with harmonic sequencing. So what that means is like we have these 3-4 notes, which is most what these things are, and then we get them again and just slightly higher, and then again slightly higher and slightly higher, and then we get like an octave displacement, and we're back to where we started. And it does the same thing, same 3 notes, higher, back to where we started, kind of thing. So it's basically harmonic sequencing with looping. So again, it doesn't go anywhere. It's like rising, but we're back to where we started. And even when we have multiple, they're basically 3 ideas. And these 3 ideas, even when they're not just looping internally, they kind of present a larger loop. We'll get idea A looped into idea B, loops itself, and then it goes back into idea A. They're all really in the same harmonic style. The harmony, again, doesn't progress anywhere, and that's what allows these things to just kind of flow into each other. So again, it's kind of this dreamlike thing, and just like we're not progressing. We have like suggestions of something which could be like passion and outburst, but it doesn't get there. It does kind of build up eventually towards the climax of, I think, Irving, you'd maybe say it's the second act in your understanding, where Madeline. Okay, so here's our spoiler warning. Madeline jumps off out of the bell tower. Okay, so that's kind of our I don't know. Would you call that like the second act, Irving?
I don't remember the I don't remember. I'd have to go and think about the events, but that would definitely be an act break when she. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. I think using my understanding of your act breakdown is that it's probably the second act, but I could be wrong. Okay, just throwing it in there because we talked about acts earlier.
Yeah.
So the music does build there. Then we get the kind of the third act where we have our big kind of twist. Again, spoiler alert: if you don't know the film, watch the film. Don't listen to this. But essentially, we get Scotty, falls in love with Judy at this point, who is Madeline, in a way that I'm not, even though I'm spoiling it, I'm still going to try and say as little as I can. And then we're eventually going to start building up to like the biggest musical climax. But interesting to note, Judy, when she writes, in her letter scene, she writes and she kind of explains what actually happened and then rips up her letter. But during that scene, we actually get music for her, which is the only time we get this. Pretty much everything else has been just kind of chords, static chords, and then these like 3 ideas that kind of loop with each other. Her idea also loops, but it's a little bit less insistent. And it's actually kind of the inverse shape of, instead of like rising, it goes down. So she's kind of the inverse shape of music, which I think we can at this point associate with our main character, Scotty. So interestingly, of course, though, this doesn't reoccur in the film. She doesn't really get much of a voice, really, throughout the last bit of this film. So her identity is kind of squashed after it is briefly allowed to exist. But it is interesting that it's kind of in the same style, but like just in an inverted kind of direction of Scotty's music, and that it is looping to. And again, so we'll talk about what that means for this, for the purpose of all this looping. Okay, so we get to the climactic scene, which in the official soundtrack is just called "Scene d'amour," love scene. At this point, so Scotty has tried to transform Judy into his idealized image, the literally the image of Madeline, and we get this moment where it starts. We were going to bring all of these three shapes that don't have a whole lot of contour, other than that we just keep making them rise. They're all going to kind of come together here. And it starts with him alone in her room, waiting for her. Then when she gets this nice shot, she kind of shows up at the end of the hall and starts walking toward him. And we get a literal quotation here of the Liebestod, or love death, from Wagner's Tristan und Isolde, which, in case we hadn't already recognized this, it's a pretty on the nose if you know what this opera is. Now, already the music has kind of been in that exact same kind of like harmonic and orchestrational world, very much as Tristan. But here, like, in case we didn't recognize that already, it's thrown at us. It's interesting too that in The Birds, they actually played this segment of Tristan on the radio. Most people think it's a deliberate nod to the fact that it was so important to Vertigo. Yeah, so just briefly, this is a really important opera that essentially it's kind of a doomed love story, which the two lovers, are obsessed with each other, and it's impossible for them to be together for one reason or another. We don't have to go into details of the plot, but it's particularly notable because the opening prelude of the opera, we get this maybe three notes from the orchestra in this gigantic chord that it's the most famous chord in music, called the Tristan chord. No one really knows how to analyze it exactly, but it doesn't resolve for the entire opera until the end. Okay, so it's like a 3.5 hour non-resolved, very much about unfulfilled erotic longing. Wagner is very clear this is what this is about. It's all about unfulfilled erotic passion.
Nice.
Hitchcock is pretty clear that's what this film is about too, in some ways. He even says the Coit Tower that keeps showing up is actually it's supposed to be a phallic symbol. In case he's literally pretty ominous about that too. Although there is no consummation of that, they don't even mention it in the film. It's clearly what is undergirding everything here. So in the end of the opera, the music that is quoted, the male of our love duo is dead, and the female kind of falls on top of him and dies on top of him. And she has no reason to die. She just has to be together with him in the spiritual realm. So that's the music we get here. When she starts walking down the hall and she's dressed fully as Madeline. And this builds, she walks in, they embrace each other and kind of get this long kind of spiraling shot of them. That's the musical climax. Here we get these themes, that they don't go anywhere. We keep reaching and looping back down, all of the three ideas. And finally, we get a resolution to it. Just like in Wagner's opera, we finally get a resolution after 3.5 hours. We finally get a nice C major chord. They are embracing each other. And then we go to the end of the film, which is, I'm not going to get into what happens exactly at the end. I think it's pretty clear once you watch this film that this is largely about the nature of, kind of what the line is between erotic longing and obsession and idealization.
Yeah.
And the music, that's what it does. It reinforces it. It's not there's no, it's not a love theme. Like, oh, here's a melodic line that's going to show the sweetness of this character's, love or whatever. No, it doesn't do that. It is music about obsession, right? It loops back on itself. It's an idea, and I'm going to repeat the idea, but with more intensity because it's a little bit higher and more intensity. And I'm going to go back to the idea again and try and build up again. Oh, I'm going to do another idea and build up on that. And, I'm going to go back to the first idea. It's literally just enacting that theme. And it's not really obvious until you understand that that's what the film is about.
Yeah. And it's not very obvious for a good ways into the film that that's really what the film is about, too.
Yeah, right. And as soon as you understand that's what the film is about, you understand why the music is in this kind of obsessive, like it's got this, the language of Wagner's erotic longing. It literally quotes that unfulfilled longing, but it doesn't go anywhere. It rises and it spirals back up on itself. You do not listen to this and like, wow, I'm rooting for, Scotty.
No.
Yeah, it's not music to make you like the main character. In the end, I don't like anyone in that film except for maybe like the side person, Marge.
Even she's not fully likable,
Yeah, I don't think you're right. You really don't like anyone in this film.
Yeah.
So music is not trying to do that. It's not trying to convince us of the without the music to clue us in, we would never understand. We wouldn't believe their love. Which is maybe that's like emotional manipulation. No, I mean I think the camera takes care of that pretty well, and all the other things, the acting, whatever. I think it's pretty obvious without the music telling us that. The music, to me, is just reinforcing that theme in a really visceral way. Yeah. Interestingly, too, like I said, the brief moment where Judy's theme, exists, it's also obsessive, but it doesn't reappear. And I think that also kind of matches her character in a way. I think she's also obsessed with the past. Like, why else did she go back and live in the same spot? Yes, she's obsessed with this idea of a man who is only obsessed with an idea of her. Her obsession may not be quite as strong and hammer it in our face, but she's willing to lose her own personality and do whatever this guy tells her to, so she can. She says she just wants to make him happy. She's obsessive in her own right, and her music reflects that, even though it doesn't. It gets squashed by his overwhelming obsessive desire as well. But she has that too, and it's reflected in her music. So I think it's a very different kind of film score. I mean, you may, anyone listening to this, you may love it and it's kind of music you want to put on in the background. Personally, I wouldn't, but just for its overall effect as film music, it is really fantastic. Again, kind of some stuff that is, mimicking some of the innovative camera work that Hitchcock did, and then just music that reinforces the theme, but in the way that in a way that doesn't reveal the theme until it's apparent. Then once you know the theme, it is right. The music is in your faces. Everything else is. They're kind of unique film score in that way. Really masterful design. You know that Herrmann had to know exactly what he was doing here, and know what his job was in the creation of this film. Hitchcock, apparently, he's kind of interesting, in terms of his use of music, even though I haven't seen too many of his films. I know he has a quote on, apparently he said in one of his films, I can't remember the name of the film, it's Rowboat, I think, where he comments, he doesn't want there to be this powerful, big orchestral score while they're on the sea, because he says something like, the audience is going to ask where this music is coming from in the middle of the sea. And the composer said something like, well, isn't the audience going to ask where this camera is coming from out in the middle of the ocean?
Yeah, it's kind of an odd thing to say.
Yeah. So I imagine, it was probably interesting working with Hitchcock on this film. But I think there's probably a really clear artistic direction that Hitchcock gave to Herrmann, that he wanted the theme to be up front and center, and not to be that kind of world of typical emotional manipulation, so to speak. So yeah, fascinating film score. Watch the film, and if you've seen the film, I think pay attention to the music, and you'll see what the music does relative to the overall effect.
Man, you make me want to watch it again. It's just, I'm like, this film is so good. I almost gave it a 5 out of 5. It's like a 4.75, and now you're making me want to revise that because it's just so freaking good.
Yeah, just like the music is just so perfectly integrated into the overall artistic vision.
Definitely my favorite of his films. Psycho is also a masterpiece, but I think this one is just that much more perfect. And the side note to all that you were saying, which might make some people upset, and it made me upset in some ways too, but a lot of this is somewhat autobiographical. His exploration of these topics is somewhat autobiographical. And it kind of makes sense when you look at the leads that he pulled for his films are all of the same exact type. All the women are the same exact type magically. And then that became associated with Hollywood, but really, you think about it, it's kind of a Hitchcock thing.
It's really on. I think I've said on the nose like twice already, but it is kind of on the nose when Scotty, accuses her something like, I'm paraphrasing, but it's something like, oh, did he tell you how to wear your hair and what to say and how to walk and how to talk? Like, isn't that literally being a director, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but the great part, the thing that I commend it for, though, in that respect, is he is not giving himself a good time, right? Like, he's not making any excuses for it. It's like this wrenching experience of like obsession that is clearly disordered, right? Like he's clearly presenting himself as a disorder, like he has this problem, that is ugly, right? Like we're looking at the ugly part of him. And like you're saying, the music really reflects that. It's really not. It really starts off as like, oh, is this a love story? But it never once really feels like it gets into that vein in all aspects of the film. And then, as the film progresses and a lot of amazing plot twists, I haven't been surprised by a plot twist in a while, I think, because it's like a false plot twist and then there's a real plot twist. It really reveals the hand of the film, which is just this self-critique of obsession. Has nothing to do with love. So, great film. Just had to give my shout out. All right, that was a awesome session of Mixed Media Live, I would say. If you're watching this in post, listening to this in post, if you enjoyed anything that you heard here, again, like, share. If you're on podcast version, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, rate us whatever you think that we should be rated as. But I beg of you, if it's not a 5 out of 5, just let us know why, so that we can make it a 5 out of 5 experience for you, right? Like we want to improve the podcast in any which way possible. So the last thing I have to say is join our Discord, where we continue the conversation throughout the week. We talk about anything that really comes into our mind. We let you know what's going on. Our Discord link is in the description wherever you're at, and it's a growing community, so it's a fun time. And the last thing, gotta plug it, mixedmedia.locals.com. In fact, actually, you can find all links that you possibly want at mixedmediapodcast.com. But if you go to mixedmedia.locals.com, that is our support page. If you've enjoyed anything that we've done here at all, it's, wow, I was going to say it's $5 a month. Although I forgot to turn off the promotion. So literally, I think I will actually just go turn it off when I post the exclusive link after this. I think what happened was last time I forgot to post the exclusive link on Locals because we take down these live streams from our YouTube page. So for $5 a month, if you just do it for 1 month and you just want to throw us a tip that way, that is much better than coming on here and like, I don't know, YouTube has weird monetization functions, or I don't know. Don't tip us on Podbean. Don't do it. Like, go to Mixed Media, join, and if you want to give us $5, that is the best way to give us $5. And then after a month, just like quit, and that'll be great. There's no obligations there. And while you're there, you can take advantage of all the perks for that entire month. So I think that would be beneficial to you as well. So go check out those links, and we'll see you next Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you for spending time with us.
Thanks for listening and watching.